Okay, and we have participants. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Swordsquatch 2021. We are happy you are here. I am Lisa Lucido, and I am moderating tonight from Maryland KDF. We are going to listen to Kendra talk about the arms and armor of medieval Merfolk. Let's see, what else? This is my first time doing this. They had to give me notes. Reminders from the code. Black Lives Matter. Be kind to each other. Be patient with technical difficulties. We are broadcasting from Duwamish native lands. If you fail to follow the code, we will have to ban you. If you need assistance or have a question, please use the comment box. You can also send comment chit chat to other attendees that way. If you have a question that you would like to send to our speaker, please use the Q&A box. We are sponsored this year by Purple Heart Armory. Please spend your HEMA monies with the kind people of Purple Heart Armory. Also in the chat, I will include a link to the merch thing so that you can get wonderful things like yoga mats with swords on them. I think that's everything. Let us throw it over to Kendra.
Is it time? Should I just dive right in?
Well, if you want to give it another minute, but I think we have like 5 attendees. And so if you get started when you can always do a little warm-up chit chat if you'd like to give everyone a couple of minutes.
I didn't prepare any warm-up chit chat.
Well, you were telling me about your no good, very bad day.
I suppose that's true.
So anything that happens now is much better than the rest of your day was, so.
That's true. My day was not actually that bad, except for my favorite ergonomic mouse stopping working.
Oh.
So if I can't remember how to scroll anything, that's why.
Okay.
I haven't counted, but I think I may have more pictures than in my previous Swordsquatch appearance.
Oh my goodness. Well, I always love the pictures that you find. And who doesn't love Merfolk, right? So.
Merfolk and angry ducks.
I mean, they're not quite as terrifying as geese, but they're pretty terrifying.
Few things are as terrifying as geese, except swans.
Yeah.
I'm going to step off camera for like 10 seconds, and maybe then we can get started if we have more people.
I was going to try and join Facebook, but it has like a 10-second lag. So.
Okay, I can't see Zoom at all when I'm screen sharing, apparently. So I have no idea how many people we have.
We have about 5.
Excited.
Well, that includes you and me. So there's 3 people, and then there'll be some more on Facebook.
Oh, 3 people is not very many. So maybe I should give that a little more time.
All right, if you like.
Since, I don't know, my parents said they were going to dial in.
Yep, there's like 3 or 4 people on Facebook.
I think some other warm-up chit chat I can offer is I don't know who creates titles for things at Swordsquatch, but they are clearly amazing. I did not come up with this title. I was going to give it a really boring title.
I love their clever titles. I think they've been very influential at making everyone step up their workshop title game. Oh, while we are waiting, I will show everyone my, like I said, you can order yoga mats. See, this is last year's design. You should get a yoga mat with swords on it. Yeah, right now everything's at Society 6, but I hear they might be switching their merch person. So we might see a new announcement about that in the next few days. I think they're looking for someone that has more extended sizing.
Yeah, I got some leggings last year and was surprised by the sizing. Other than the size, they're great leggings. Everyone should totally get sword leggings from Swordsquatch.
Why don't we go ahead and start, because this will be available on Facebook right away when you're finished. So.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Kendra Brown. I am an independent researcher studying medieval manuscripts mostly, and I practice HEMA at the Athena School of Arms near Boston. And today we will be discussing poor unfortunate swords, or not really that unfortunate because they're kind of cool, but a survey review of late medieval merfolk and their arms and armor. So where did this begin? How did I come up with the idea of even looking into this? I was looking for something else and I found this picture. And I had to know more. This was in a book of hours, which is a personal prayer book that someone would use to, throughout the day, they might pause in their work or whatever they're doing, or they would go to church at certain times, at certain hours, and then they would have prayers to say and scripture to read that was appropriate for each hour of the day. I was expecting a book of hours to be illustrated with religious scenes, and this is a mermaid with a sword and a shield fighting some kind of angry duck beast. On the facing page, the digitized copy, I was viewing the pages were out of order, but on the facing page is what seems to be the very same mermaid wearing armor with a somewhat bigger sword fighting the same angry duck beast. Like, this is now extremely mysterious, and I've only been looking at one book. Why is it exactly the same mermaid both times? What does it mean? I'm not sure I will ever know what it means. So here is that 2-page spread known as an opening in manuscript studies. So you can see there's a nativity scene on one side, and on the facing page, there's text that goes with it. And then there's this whole elaborate scene happening on the outside, which is a very typical layout for books of hours, where you have sort of a vertical thing happening. Often it's like nature or related to the text somehow, but this one has a small person climbing a tree to get birds out of a nest. There will be more mysteries, don't worry, but this is where this started. So the merfolk that we're going to see today are mostly from books of hours or similar personal religious manuscripts. Devotional is probably the right word. Most of these manuscripts were created in the Low Countries, so what is now Belgium and the Netherlands. During the medieval era, which country that region belonged to changed a lot. So if I get something wrong, I'm sorry, I'm thinking in the wrong century. But this is primarily the cities of Ghent and Bruges, which had a whole industry of manuscript creation. These were created in the 15th and 16th centuries, and most of the merfolk are from the borders of pages, but sometimes they are also in initials. So here's a few initials to get us started. The first one is a large letter D with a mermaid who's playing a lute, mandolin. This is from the Sforza Black Hours, which was a book of hours that belonged to Gian Galeazzo Sforza, who was Duke of Milan at the time. This book, the pages were painted black before any of the writing or decorating was done. They use more gold than normal books. They have to use brighter, more saturated colors. It's extremely expensive. And they're especially rare now because that black stain also degrades the paper a lot, or the parchment. So very few have survived, and the ones that we have now are very fragile. This one is held in Vienna. The other two are from manuscripts that haven't been stained black first. One of them in the middle is part of a sort of optical illusion where it looks like it's paper hung on a wall. This was a really cool style in the late 15th into the 16th centuries. And the large purple P is sort of yet a different art style where it's sort of like it's an optical illusion of a relief carving, but it's also not stone colored. I'm not even sure how to explain like it's, you know, like carving a stone, which the middle one is sort of, but not quite, but also it's a completely unnatural color. So there you go, some introductory mermaids. Important features of medieval mermaids. Some of this will sound familiar, some of it will not. They have half human bodies. That's sort of a defining characteristic of what is now and was then called a mermaid. They only sometimes wear clothing. Modern mermaids often sort of go half and half. They wear modesty garments maybe, but not like clothing. Modern merfolk who have breasts are likely to have them covered up because that's our modern culture. But medieval merfolk with breasts seem to prefer not to cover them up. It's rare to see medieval merfolk illustrations that have women's clothing, although some of them do have distinctive women's hats. Merfolk probably live in the ocean. I say probably because they're almost never shown in water. Drawing water in addition to everything else is kind of a pain. It's less logical to fill it with flowers and strawberries than a drawing that might be just of the ground. So we assume that mermaids live in the ocean or in the water, and viewers are encouraged to sort of fill that in. Sometimes mermaids are really dangerous. Sometimes they have weapons. These are not all the same types. Many merfolk can captivate mortals with their appearance or voice. You've probably heard of this in stories like the Odyssey, where when the ship goes near where the sirens live, sirens are dangerous mermaids, specifically dangerous, extra dangerous. All of the crew have to block their ears so that they can't hear the sirens singing and then be tempted to steer the ship into the rocks. In addition to being dangerous, medieval merfolk seem to love to play music and also do domestic tasks around the house. I'm going to start with sirens, so the more carnivorous, dangerous mermaids. I'm also realizing suddenly I should have given a content warning. There's going to be a lot of partial nudity because mermaids don't like wearing clothing. So sirens were a separate category of more dangerous merfolk. They are at least sometimes specifically associated with using their voice and singing to compel mere mortals, or at least distract them. And they are a distinct thing from ordinary mermaids in medieval art. They might have two tails. They might have a fish tail and a bird body. They might have just the bird body. That's still a siren. I have not yet investigated why the siren category is sort of varied like that, but here are some nice manuscript examples and a statue that's at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, which looks a whole lot like the Starbucks mermaid. that's because the Starbucks mermaid is based on a 16th century piece of art. Let me remember to look at my notes. What else does this say? In general, medieval merfolk don't have to have exactly one human torso and one fish-like tail. Multiple human torsos is rare, but sometimes multiple tails happen. Sometimes there are other animals mixed in. In general, for this presentation, I'm vaguely saying merfolk are more or less human on top, fish on the bottom, and the borders are kind of fuzzy. And this is how they get you. But like literally, this is how the siren will attack a ship. This particular ship, the sailors are all sleeping, is how they've been gotten so badly. This is an early 14th century manuscript, so from around the same time, a little earlier than 133, the Sword and Buckler manuscript. And this is just a really cool picture. I don't have a lot more to say about sirens, but I think this picture is cute and funny. If I had to guess why she's holding her sword weirdly, it's to make it fit in the picture. So here is a little bit more of the sort of full diversity of medieval mermaids. The blue centaur mermaid merfolk person in the center, we're going to see that sort of form factor again. But a lot of the rest of these that have shells or shell-like tails or claw feet, you should know that this variety exists, but I'm going to try to stick to the more familiar form of merfolk. There's another border illustration from the Black Hours here too, which I especially can't explain because most of the hybrids are at least like whole parts of creatures, and this seems to be a tail and a long neck with breasts and a head. I have so many questions. That's sort of how I can tell that research is going well. It looks like there's a question Q&A, which now that I've looked at it, is it common for the sirens to hold their tails when they aren't holding weapons or instruments? Yes, I don't know why, although I sort of wonder if part of the symbolism of the mermaid, there's a lot of duality going on, which is sort of either like in a liminal way where one or the other, or sometimes both at once. And so maybe having both hands occupied is part of that. I'm not sure, but the tail holding pose is especially common in earlier depictions of mermaids in within this time frame. And on the theme of holding things, here are merfolk holding musical instruments, and also one who's holding a jawbone like a musical instrument. I'm not sure if it's percussion or something else. Merfolk playing little bagpipes are surprisingly common in manuscript borders. I don't know. If you yearn to move to Atlantis, I hope you like bagpipes. They have a lot of bagpipes there. And as we continue looking at these, think also about like that duality thing. When you have a creature that's half something and half something else, it is necessarily dual and liminal. And in this case, you're mixing land and water, and you're mixing mammal and not mammal. But also inherent to merfolk is the ocean. And so think about what might the ocean have meant to these readers at a time when the ocean was your best means of travel, the only way to do large scale trade. So what kept country scale economies going, but also it's this untamable natural force that sometimes swallows up your loved ones, and storms come from there. It's merciless and unpredictable. So if an ocean person shows up on your front doorstep, will you let them in? Here's some nice homemaking merfolk. I'm not sure if the stick is for cooking, but I really love this person who has the little flower pot and is just really happy about their flower pot. All of these were drawn in France, which was another major center of manuscript production. They all sort of have a similar look to them because these 4 things are only from 2 manuscripts. But this seems to have been common for manuscripts from the 1420s from France. Merfolk not holding things and also not wearing shirts. These are a little more spread out in time. So there's one from 1465, one from 1420, and one from 1524 who has really cool hair. I don't know, merfolk are clearly extremely fashionable. The most typical way for mermaids specifically, so female presenting, breast having merfolk in medieval art, is to be holding a comb, one of these little square double-sided combs, and either a hand mirror or a small freestanding mirror, often with the comb in the hair. This is often, mirrors in art are often said to mean vanity, but that sort of stinks of the patriarchy to me. Like, why does it mean vanity? Why is that the first thing it means? And in thinking about this, I wondered, if I saw a person holding a mirror and a comb, what would I think? I would think this person cares about their appearance, which I guess is vanity, but also they just they want to be a participating member of society and look the part, or they want to have control over how they look. The mirror and the comb might be fastidiousness or hygiene, which are also ways that we humans, human-like creatures, control our own appearance to look healthy and look appealing. So maybe this is part of the whole thing, where mermaids and sirens are tempting and they're distracting and they can take control over viewers just by how they look or how they sound. And so, maybe this is some of what makes them scary, is when they're not doing that or keeping house, planting things in flower pots, playing music, what they're doing is usually taking care of themselves, keeping up their dangerous appearance. Certainly in the 15th century, women who put a lot of time into their appearance and paid particular attention to wanting to stay young looking, it will, I'm sure, not shock most of you, were accused of witchcraft, of using magic to stay young looking and remain attractive, because this was really threatening to men who were weak to that sort of thing. So I wonder if there's some of that in the mirror and the comb, that threatening sense of she has control over her own looks, and because of that, she has control over maybe you. These particular mermaids also show a little variety in how the fishtail joins into the waist of the human body, which is not very important, but sort of a fun little thing to take note of. And they have a couple of different tail shapes, some more fish-like, some more fantastic. Also, the one at the top, who has sort of the slate gray body, has almost a different posture than the rest, where her human torso is up at a right angle, which is something that seems to change over time, that in the 14th and early 15th centuries, you see more of that right angle. And then as time rolls forward, it's more of the sort of almost like a merfolk who are standing up, where their tail is in line with their spine and doesn't have that sharp angle. Medieval people sometimes were really, really, really into the binary gender thing. So much so that in books of hours, there's usually a calendar at the beginning. It usually has little illustrations to make it sort of fun. And often that will include zodiac icons, maybe a little medallion that has a lobster in it, because crabs are basically like lobster, right? And in a surprising number of those, Gemini looks just like the Adam and Eve picture. So a naked man and a naked woman, where this interest in having, a pair of opposites has overridden anyone paying attention to the meaning of the word Gemini, twins, two of the same thing. I hope someone's done research on that, because as before, I have questions. These particular examples of merfolk in facing pairs, I gathered together because in all three of these pairs, their human bodies are not as different from each other as you might expect if you were trying to highlight oppositeness or binariness. I don't know what that means. Maybe it just means artists are forgetful. But it also gives a nice neutrality and room for interpretation that I really like here. And that sort of connects back to that first mermaid in the gold armor, where I looked at those, and I often will expect that maybe the artist thinks I will assume that anyone wearing armor is a man, but those two pages were so clearly the same mermaid with similar weapons, with the same shield, that now I have to examine my life and my choices and make extra sure that when I see armor, I don't assume this is probably a man and I should look for signs that it's not. Yeah, pairs of things. And now we come to what you all came here for, because it's what's offered by the title, Merfolk with weapons. I really like this cool blue guy with his giant letter V. The art is really nice. It's a nice style, but also has a lot of energy, built up in those coils, like a coiled spring. Although he seems less cool now that I've noticed where his eyes are looking, which is at a snake who's looped up in his tail, who he's apparently about to smack with a stick. That's not cool. Snakes are our friends. But this is some lovely merfolk shading and highlighting. This is by an artist known as the Master of the Putti, because the Master of the Putti's main talent was drawing chubby babies all over everything. So weapons, swords and shields, sticks and shields. I don't know, they drew them. They draw them in poses. Something that is noticeable here and is really interesting is they aren't all right-handed. And there's not even a significant bias. It's not hard to find left-handed merfolk holding weapons. Probably, if I had to guess, this is because artists are paying more attention to composition, or they're using pattern templates and flipping them over, and that means sometimes they come out left-handed. But it's also just cool. Not everyone is the same. This fantasy world does not necessarily reflect reality, where basically everyone is expected to be right-handed. I can't really explain the shield that looks just like a head. I don't know if that beard has any particular protective power. Merfolk holding swords and not holding shields, or holding a fish. This one in the middle has suffered some damage, which sadly is a thing that happens to manuscripts a fair amount, but on the flip side indicates that this manuscript was used enough that getting dirty became inevitable. this isn't quite circular enough to be a candle wax strip. So this might even be food grease. It means that this manuscript was part of someone's life while they were doing normal messy stuff and not just precious and kept in a special cabinet and only taken out when you're wearing gloves. The other two in this sort of pastel color scheme are among the earliest merfolk in this collection from the 1350s, which is why they look like a somewhat different art style that's got heavier outlines. And they are literally closer to their text. I don't think they're any closer to the meaning of the text, but just there's less border art in 14th century manuscripts. It's less wide. There's still border art on every page. Moving along before I say anything else confusing, have some mer archers. Here too, left-handed and right-handed are coexisting. And that thing with the elbow. I'm sure many of you have taken archery classes. Some of you may have been specifically told not to do that with your elbow. Apparently, it's an essential part of the medieval archery form. If you want to know more about this, the YouTube channel Todd's Workshop did a whole medieval myth busting at Agincourt thing where they bring in an expert who shoots in the traditional way and shoots a traditional bow, and he shoots exactly like that. It's really weird, but this presentation is not about archery. So I will simply say, this is not a mer-person who needs a better coach. This is a mer-person who has a really, really strong bow. Merfolk in armor. I especially love the little guy with the duck beak and the scythe, because what on earth is a mer-person going to do with a scythe? Are they going to come up and mow the lawn? Scythers are kind of weird and funny anyway, but they just look so dignified. Good posture, good weapon, good armor. Similarly, the person on the, I hate this part of video presentations, it's my left and also your left, from the St. Denis Missal, like feeling really buff today. We all need that energy. We've got some colorful armor, some jousting helmets, a little of everything. And also some unusual stances. I'm not sure if the armor, the blue armor wearing person is supposed to have their sword behind their head, or it just kind of came out that way. I don't know. We all have strange forms sometimes. And here are heraldic merfolk. Heraldry can include basically anything. I think it was someone at Swordsquatch who told me about the large family whose shield is 3 shrimp. I learned through this project that the city of Warsaw, their city coat of arms is a siren specifically, not a nice friendly mermaid who might not eat your head, but a siren with a dragon tail and webbed feet and a sword and a shield. And there isn't really a legend to go with it, just a sort of, once upon a time, there was a siren and someone was nice to her. So she said, I'll protect your city if you ever need it. So those 2 medallions, which are in the second from the left position, are from the covers of city accounting books. There was a book for each year, and the book would have decoration on the cover, which included a little siren medallion. She's now known as Sirenka, and libraries in particular, public libraries, have different like variations and interpretations of this motif for their logos, but in minimal and modern ways, which is very different from the arms all the way on the left, where a mermaid has just been plunked in there. You can tell which member of this family this is because of the mermaid. who has been reduced to just the most symbolic parts because the arms were too much. Who knows? On the other side of the screen, on the right side, are mermaids who definitely have arms, or mermaids, merfolk, who definitely have arms because they are presenting shields. I'm now blanking on it, but blanking on the exact word. The German word for when you have creatures or somethings that are holding up your shield is the same word that Joachim Meyer uses, that's usually translated as the little figures on the sides, when he means the people who are fighting each other that you should be imitating. Heraldry is full of weird stuff, and also some mermaids. I promise this is going to get to be somewhat more than just a slideshow. We're building up to something. Merfolk also appear on furniture and architecture. They appear in so many churches in England, have numerous mermaids among their many decorations. It's actually kind of really surprising. So the light colored stone mermaid at the bottom is from the 14th century. The ceiling of that cathedral, every time there's an intersection of the Gothic spines, there's a decorative medallion, and this is one of them. The Mermaid Chair on the right from Cornwall is associated with a local legend about a particular mermaid who would turn herself passing for human, very beautiful, very well dressed, looked very wealthy, would go to church, would never speak to anybody. And one day, one year, there was a particularly talented singer in the local choir, and they fell in love and lived happily forever after under the sea. The town knew that it was still the same mermaid because one day a ship dropped their anchor on her door and she had to come out and ask them to park somewhere else. Which is a very cute story. Interestingly, the story is not recorded before the late 19th century. So probably it's not that the town had this story and then someone made, this is called the Mermaid Chair, but quite the opposite. They've had this Mermaid Chair since the 15th century. And in the 19th century, someone said, you know, this seems like the kind of thing that should have a story to go with it. She's kind of banged up, but you can see she also is holding a comb and a mirror. The chair on the left is from a completely different and much later style of chair carving, where the sort of fishtailness has been, I don't know, morphed into a purely decorative element that no longer needs to mean a fish, a living thing, and just has cool shapes in it. This like duality and symmetry. Here is another example of two mermaids. They're very convenient to pose because they don't have knees. And so they look really nice symmetrically like that. And now let us move from weapons and symmetrical arrangements to mer fights. Because merfolk have this inherent duality and contradiction and sort of the bringing together of two opposites, and they're so very posable, it then works really well to just have them getting in fights all the time. These are all merfolk versus merfolk fights, but this is also an opportunity to then add an extra layer of that liminality and juxtaposition, because you can have a mer-person fighting a not mer-person, and now you have more opposites. And once that happens, that whole thing then becomes inherently liminal, because someone from the sea and someone from the land can't fight from their home territories. Someone has to be on away turf. And using this sort of symmetrical composition for fight scenes and not just for posing then gives a lot more energy and sort of a dynamic feeling to the piece, where that chair, it looks like they're kind of reclining maybe. It's a nice place to sit down. And these, on the top row, these merman versus merman fights, they have a lot of energy coiled up in them. The very green melee battle happening across the bottom is from a manuscript known as the Portuguese genealogy. This particular bit is completely incidental to the rest of the piece. It's purely decorative. If you're interested in manuscript art, I highly recommend checking it out because it was created through a collaboration by mail, where the king wanted a genealogy and he wanted it to be done by his two favorite artists. One of them was in Lisbon and one was in Bruges. And so the art was penciled in Lisbon and then mailed to Bruges for the best painter in all of Europe to put the colors in. This stretched out for a very long time and the work was never finished. I suspect because the best painter in all of Europe can do much less confusing and bothersome work than waiting for things to paint to come by mail. Anyway, it's really beautiful. It's really cool. I think there's a whole story in how it got created, and I haven't found a place where I can read that story yet. We'll now jump back to the 14th century for some jousting with lances. I'm not sure what else to say about this. On the upper right, these are merfolk whose fish body also has a fish head. I don't understand how that works, but it clearly works for them. And probably works great for jousting, because being able to gallop and have your steed aim itself is probably easier than thinking about where your own tail is going. In the middle is a mer-person with breasts who has a rotella and a lance, and is apparently having a fight on foot with a centaur. This book is full of prayers. It does not explain anything. I hope, it's called the Queen Mary Psalter, maybe it belongs to Queen Mary. I hope someone got a lot of fun out of having these particular illustrations in the margins. At the bottom are some very long fish people who are wearing chainmail pajamas and holding their lances very strangely. They are from the border of an Arthurian romance. That's about all I know, actually. But they look like they're having fun. And now we come back to the fully armored mer-person versus the very angry duck and a friend. These are two whole pages that have that scene playing out at the bottom. I wanted you to be able to see what does the rest of the page look like? What else is going on? These are two different styles. The one on the left is what's known as a scatter border, I think, where there's this nebulous field and things are scattered on it, usually mostly flowers. This one also has a lot of animals. Someone has posted a question. How can you tell that's a duck? It's not a duck. Let me finish talking about layout and then I'll talk about the bird. So on the left is the probably more common layout style where there's floral decoration, organic shapes, and maybe a larger scene happening at the bottom. On the right is a whole scene, a whole little world is happening behind and around the words. This one is particularly interesting in this context because it adds to the liminality thing where you can see the whole shore where it's happening, and you can see that there's a whole group of these hairy people are, I think, what's usually called wild men, who are a specific type of extremely hairy feral person who lives in the woods, who apparently are at war with the merfolk. The gems scattered on the ground suggest that this may be a reference to India as it's described in the letter of Prester John, who describes India as a place that is so rich with natural resources that you can just pick up gems on the ground. So the bird. My best guess, with help from a friend, is that this probably is the legendary medieval avian creature, the Elarion, not to be confused with aileron, that's a flappy thing on an airplane. The Elarion is very much like an eagle, but a lot larger. They have a rule of 2, so there should be a reproducing pair, and once they lay 2 eggs, that reproducing pair goes and throws themselves into deep water and dies. And then the rest of the birds of the world raise the 2 chicks to become the new Elarion pair. From this, we know that in medieval bestiaries and legends, there were very, very large birds who lived near the water. The extra point in the beak when the beak is open is a typical beak shape for an eagle. And I learned while looking into this, eagles go swimming. I don't think they do it recreationally, but when eagles swim in the water, they have to take this sort of duck-like posture where their head is at a right angle to their shoulders to stick up out of the water. And they hold their wings awkwardly, and their tail kind of fans out in the water. And it looks a lot like this, actually. So I refer to them as ducks because of that posture of the head, but they are actually not ducks at all. They are probably Elarion or some other kind of eagle. But also the steed of the wild person or fighter from the land team is not always an Elarion. Why is my slide not going? So this motif appears a lot. This seems strange. After finding the golden armor mermaid, the next thing I did was look for more manuscripts by the same artist. And I learned that that artist was part of a workshop, a multi-generational family of manuscript artists who were then part of the larger Ghent Bruges industry. And within that industry, it seems, based on evidence like this, but usually evidence that's somewhat more serious and based on Bible scenes, it seems that artists who were within that community and workshops within that community were sharing their templates and their pattern books so that if a wealthy person placed an order for a book of hours that has all of the same scenes that the most important person around has in their book, you could take the patterns, get all of those scenes, have them already laid out, and copy them into your new piece of work, however you see fit. And that's how you get things like 6 manuscripts, plus the one from the title slide, plus that golden mermaid in armor. So 8, there's going to be more that all have almost exactly the same scene, but it's also never exactly the same. Manuscript studies is weird. What else do I have in my notes? Oh, an interesting thing to notice here is this is a pair of people who are unambiguously enemies. They're facing each other. They're about to attack each other. They're definitely enemies. They are also opposite from each other in a variety of ways. So in addition to being from the land and from the sea, the wild man is covered in hair, which is very opposite to the, I learned this week, medieval people may have called these fish knights. The fish knight is cold and scaly and also cold and rigid from the armor, and is very much the opposite of warm, furry mammals, land creatures. Their
Kendra,
weapons are...
We have another comment in the Q&A.
Yes. I wonder if the mermaid versus wild man on duck was some sort of local legend or fable, or it could have just been fashion. That's sort of the question I'm asking and haven't found an answer to yet. It is interesting that, there we go, thank you. It is interesting that the books of hours that have this scene, they only have it once, where the other non-Bible scenes may come up multiple times, where you have a field with a round fence and bunnies inside the fence, or sheep. Nature scenes, you might see the same one more than once in the book, because Book of Hours is often hundreds of pages long. So you need a lot of little scenes to fill up all the space, but there's typically only one. There are a couple of times where there are two of these merfolk fighting scenes. I haven't yet found a specific legend that's associated with this scene. I've been hinted that I should check out the letter of Prester John to see if that is tied in here because of the gems on the ground, and the Elarion is also mentioned there. And there may also be a connection with the menacing sea coming in and having a confrontation with the land that is peculiar to the Low Countries, Belgium, Netherlands, where the relationship with the sea is about to come in and attack the land is different from other countries that don't have to build whole superstructures to keep the sea out. Did I just, okay. There are so many of this. It's not every single book of hours that came out of that region. There's just a lot. So these are more varied. They're spread across 2 pages. In one of them, the eagle beast has become a pig beast. And we can't tell if that's the same golden mer warrior as the row above it. And the bottom one has an actual literal duck. It's also interesting to see, looking at all of these things that must have been drawn from the same template, the same thing drawn in different art styles and by different skill levels. And here's something a little bit different. More mer people opposing mer people. These are not stuck in that same exact pattern, although in the very low resolution, this was a very tiny ornament on the original manuscript page. The gold colored one has the same curved sword with a single spike on the back edge and the spiky shield and the tail with lots of mer fronds. But instead of fighting a wild man riding an Elarion, has a mermaid with a mirror and a comb. So the interactions going on here are different. The one with the fountain in the bottom right is older than the rest and not from Ghent or Bruges, but it's sort of interesting. It's this same mermaid, not mermaid, almost opposition layout. But in all of these cases, there's no longer that sense of being enemies, where the wild man had with the shoulders that were turned so you could make an attack. These pairs are all turned the other way, so they're both kind of facing you, but also kind of facing each other. Yeah. And in these examples, I think this may be my last slide of pairs of mer people. There will be new things coming. How long have I been talking anyway? So these examples seem like these are mer people who are kind of on the same team, probably. They're drawn in similar colors. They seem to be not necessarily interacting, but sort of working toward the same goal. The one at the top that has the gold highlighting, which is actual metallic gold that's been painted on with a very tiny brush. I would love to know more about this one. It is held at Indiana University in Bloomington. If one of you goes there, see if you can visit it, because this has not been digitized. This was in a random tweet from the library, and this is the only piece of the whole manuscript that is available online. And on the bottom, these tan merfolk, something really interesting is going on here, because we have an archer who has fairly modern form, note, without the elbow sticking up in the air. And the other mer-person, who isn't holding anything, has almost the same pose, but it's just a little bit different, with the rearward hand raised up a little bit to ear level, in a way that could also be holding a mirror and combing your hair. But when you're shooting an arrow, you don't hold your hand up above your ear like that. When you're holding a mirror out in front of you, you don't put your arm at full extension. So very, very liminal and dual. I don't know if this was an artist's mistake and there was supposed to be something there that didn't get painted in, or if this duality is intentional. I think it's really cool. Also, you can compare to the size of the text. This also is very tiny. A lot of them are. And now, things are going to change. We're going to go under the grotto. I didn't have a better grotto joke. There's an important shift in mermaid iconography starting in the late 15th century, but sort of slowly gaining steam until the mid 16th, when it suddenly is everywhere. Church carvings shown in these pictures didn't change as radically as manuscripts did, but these are really cool examples that didn't fit on any other slide. So here is 3 different, these are called misericords, which I always thought was a musical instrument. Today I learned. You know, when you go to like the theater or movie theater, they have the seats that fold down automatically and they snap up when you stand up. And if you're not going to sit down right away, you can kind of lean back against it and take some weight off your legs. These are specifically carved features for leaning back and taking a little weight off your legs. You can see in the lower left that it's a whole hinged seat. These were the choir stalls in 3 different churches. So each of them has a mermaid couple. At the top left, you can tell that this is intended as a male-female couple, because one, but only one, is wearing a lady's hat, which is the sort of pie-shaped thing with the chin strap. And then there is, so that's the earliest, as early as the year 1220. Below that, from Stratford upon Avon, a nice mer couple with what is the handle of a mirror, maybe it used to have a mirror, and a comb. And then on the right, something completely different. In particular, the background, the seat itself, is now decorated much more extensively, but in sort of a more like background wallpaper kind of a way. And the mer people have changed. So they no longer have that right angle in their spine. And they've got this kind of leafy stuff at their waists. They're much more, I don't know, like statue buff looking. This is from 1508. Things have changed. Also, I think both of these mer people, their weapon arm has broken off, because they have shields facing each other that looks like maybe they're warriors, but also they have no weapon hands. That one is in Paris. It's a whole cathedral that's decorated in this style with the kind of wallpaper decorations and lots of detail. So what happened? What happened was, in the late 1470s, someone, nobody knows who, nobody knows how or exactly when, someone discovered the ruins of Emperor Nero's golden house. they didn't know it was Nero's golden house at the time, or things might not have played out this way, but the Trajan built his baths over the golden house because the golden house was kind of an imperial embarrassment. And rather than waste the space, they built on top of it. So the whole golden house was still there, and with its foundation, structural beams, everything, creating empty spaces that were protected from the elements. So all of their interior decoration survived. The fresco at the top center is specifically from the Golden House and was in this really distinctive art style that no one had seen for hundreds of years. It was popular throughout the classical and imperial Roman periods, but once that had gone out of style, it kind of stayed gone until now, when late medieval people could see it and they really liked it, and it had stuff everywhere, and medieval people loved having stuff everywhere. It also has, you can see in some of these examples, kind of illusory architecture painted directly onto flat walls. And it has all of these unusual creatures built into the composition with curving, spiraling shapes and sort of making their own garlands. And those we now know as grotesques. The origin of this word was from late 15th century Italy, when it was used to describe the decoration style that was seen in the grottos, those cave-like spaces created by the ruined buildings. And so they called it grotesque, like the grottos. So these are original Roman decorations. Here are some artists' sketches who went to visit the Golden House and copied down the decorations they saw so they could use them later. There's sort of a darker paper style here and a lighter one, but these are drawings of the same thing. I put little insets in the center so you can compare them, of what seems to be a horned mer-centaur satyr person with some kind of a staff who's going somewhere and carrying someone with them. And then it's surrounded by fabulous plants. So from these sketches, then whole buildings were decorated. The center here, the dark black and white image, is a bronze pulpit by Donatello. The rest are painted frescoes. So any depth and shading there is just paint, no carving, but imitating that same style and adding to it in a very 16th century kind of way. So with that context in mind, some shifts happened in manuscript art where these kind of architectural motifs start showing up and being full of merfolk. Or I'm not sure if the leaf skirt is technically indicates merfolk, but it has very much the same shape, the same compositional function. So I have included them here. These are both from manuscripts. I'm not sure where I was going with that. Only one of them is a book of hours. The other is Miscellany on Saint John Climacus, which I assume is sort of like a saint's life, but more varied and not just biography. In the lower one, from the Glockenden Gebet book, note also that the gold highlights have a sort of sparkly nature. That could mean that this is, instead of real 24 karat gold that's been either used as leaf or made into a semi-liquid pigment, this more sparkly stuff could be what was called mosaic gold, which was a bronze powder that looked a lot like gold, cost a lot less, but would never get as smooth as real gold. It would stay sparkly. Okay, so let me take a literal deep breath here, because things are about to change again. In this climate of architectural designs with merfolk hidden in them and in symmetrical compositions, we now get armor covered with merfolk. And a credit caption that I didn't clean up. There will, I think, be an easier to read one on the next slide. These shoulders belong to a suit of armor that is at the Metropolitan Museum. This armor belonged to Emperor Ferdinand I, although he was merely Archduke when it was made. It was made in Nuremberg by Künstler, who was a leading armorer of the time, and seems to have made at least several suits with mermaids, but none as many. None of those suits had as many merfolk as the suit for the future emperor. Take a closer look at those two particular figures, because somewhat unexpectedly here again we have the two figures facing each other, which we might expect to be either very symmetrical, so the same on both sides, or kind of opposite in some ways. And these are both fairly male presenting, although only one has a beard. The other one appears to have round pecs instead of square, which sometimes means a more womanly shaped body. I'm not sure. What is particularly interesting here is this style of steelworking is called repoussé. It's hammered from the back to give more shape. And this mer-person has been specifically given nicely rounded breasts, I guess. Art is complicated. And the Met on their website on the exhibit tag makes no comment about the merfolk art at all. Just, here's a suit of armor, belonged to the emperor, very nicely made, decorated with etching. Here are more merfolk from the same suit. This is, I think, a knee and a thigh, and then a close-up of the other knee or the other thigh. There's so much detail put here with just etching on a suit of armor that's gonna get hit with hammers and swords and everything. Also not indicated by the museum is whether Ferdinand asked for this particular decoration, or maybe asked for, I need a really cool suit of armor, decorate it all over however you like. But it is a really nice suit of armor, and it is really covered with lots of awesome merfolk. There's the whole thing, with close-ups of one of the legs and the elbow. That middle picture is the elbow cop. This is a small field garniture and horse armor from the same workshop that has a simpler version of the same merfolk, or similar merfolk, on only the backs of the shoulders and the sides of the helmet. The horse armor is incredibly engraved all over with different art styles of different mer creatures. One more, this is also at the Met, another helmet of a slightly different shape. And there are more of these at other museums around the world. So yes, this is the merfolk art of Künstler. This next one, you may have seen, you've probably seen photos of, because it is very famous and looks really cool in photos. These photos look weird because I post-processed them so that you could see the most of the contours possible, which makes everything look strange. An important thing to know when looking at this is this style of decoration was very popular at this time. This is the 50s and 40s, There are lots of suits of armor with tons of decoration all over them from that time. Most of them are made by making armor and then making decorative stuff and attaching it to the outside of the armor. And the thing that really made the Negroli workshop stand out, this is by Filippo Negroli, is not the design, the details. It is that this is made from a single piece of steel that was shaped into a helmet and then further hammered and shaped to create this. But also, so that said, there's a lot going on here. There's a siren who is stretched out all the way across the whole spine of the helmet. And it seems sort of unmistakably sexual in a way that us modern folks don't usually associate with helmets. Is she there to distract your opponent? Are you saying you're going to wreck your opponent like a siren wrecks a ship? So reading mermaids and their mirrors as symbols of temptation and vanity makes no sense here. On the other hand, reading mermaids as symbols of control over themselves and over others makes a lot more sense here. Maybe the siren's going to control you. Maybe this person is formidable because they can control the siren. The siren is steering a Medusa head at you, which is yet another angle of dangerous beauty and mirrors. I put too many words in my notes. Anyway, so beautiful helmet, siren, themes of control. This is the best explanation I've come up with, but I feel like I'm onto something here. Not just because it works with instead of against the regular non-armor mermaid holding a mirror thing, but also around this time, they were expressing naval supremacy differently than we expect. I had to put that there in part because I thought it was funny, but also I needed to balance this composition a little bit. This is Andrea Doria, the famed condottiero and admiral, very important guy. This portrait was commissioned by someone who was creating a private museum specifically of important men and women. And this was one of those portraits. So it's not a vanity portrait. It's all about this person was important to society. And you can tell by looking at this picture. This is the only picture in the collection, as far as we know, of what survives and is recorded that was nude. The only one that has this mythology tie-in has kind of a heroic style. I'm losing my train of thought. Like, just this is the power of the sea and sex at the same time. And you know, you got like the modesty drape that's kind of like the mermaid tails that sweep up behind them. It's clear that sexual domination and naval domination seem kind of connected. I think I'm explaining this less well than I imagined I would, but here's this portrait. The Met described this as disconcerting nudity, possibly homoerotic. These are more Negroli helmets. These are not by Filippo Negroli himself. They're by the workshop. On the left, with the same composition as the siren helmet, but this time it's a Roman soldier who is maybe being dragged somewhere by mer centaurs. I find this art style kind of a lot, but it's covered in merfolk. And speaking of covered in merfolk, this is the armor of Henry II of France. And this is that grotesque style, but turned up even more. No empty spaces here. We will fill them all with merfolk and strange monsters and exciting beasts. Can you imagine making something like this and then punching rivets through it? The rivets are just going right through the design. I didn't leave myself any notes about this. Like, it is beautiful workmanship. This is very much the armor of a king. And what does this mean? That kings and emperors are dressing themselves decorated with merfolk. I think I meant to have a wrap-up slide, and I don't have a wrap-up slide, so I will leave you with that question and then invite any questions from you. And stop sharing so I can see you.
I have a question if we don't get other questions.
Sure.
You were talking earlier about mermaids sort of symbolizing that duality, the liminal space, the earth and water. Are there any other kinds of emotions or virtues or other things that we think the mermaids often could be symbolizing?
I'm not sure.
Because it's just so many things that seem to be inserted for like that are speaking to us, I think, kind of in symbols that we don't totally understand from our 21st century perspective. So I'm reading these going, I must be missing a thing that these mermaids are supposed to also be telling me.
I'm not sure. And also, these, like all of these little mermaid arts, are in multi-hundred-page books. Some of them were 800 pages with a few mermaids and a whole lot of other things. And I don't know if that means each of these things was deep with meaning or is just kind of tossed in there.
Or they're just pretty.
Yeah. I think it's some of all of that, where, you know, the artist was paid to put pretty things on these books. Done. But also, you know, the mermaids mean things.
Well, now you have me wanting to read the letter of Prester John, so.
I did not expect investigating that one golden mermaid to lead me to reading so many things, including so many 800-page books of ours.
I'm making sure we don't have any questions on the Facebook page. Nope, we're good. Well, anybody else have, oh, there we go. Eric posted a thing you can read.
Eric says, you found a lot of pictures of armed and or armored merfolk. Did you observe whether the merfolk were more or less likely to have martial aspects than the other hybrid creatures like centaurs, horse-legged merfolk, etc.? I definitely did not collect statistics, so I hesitate to comment on more likely because there's so many numbers involved in hundreds of books of hours with hundreds of pages. The very martial merfolk, with like the armor and engraved onto emperor armor and so forth, seems to favor the horse-legged merfolk. But beyond that, I'm not sure there's a big trend. And the non-aquatic hybrids are also, sometimes they hold weapons, sometimes they don't. They just, like, those don't group together as well as merfolk who are like mermaids. So I don't know if that really answered anything, but I think my answer for you is kind of. But I think specifically the horse-legged ones.
I think now I want to see a merfolk fighting a rabbit on a snail. That would be a perfect book of ours.
Somebody please make that happen. Because the other thing I can say about horse-legged merfolk is, in the last week, as I was finishing these slides and, you know, oh no, I didn't cover this thing and I need to find something else. And I discovered this term fish knight, which is what's used in translations of medieval romances that feature a character that's one of these creatures. Specifically, in at least a couple cases, the horse-legged mer warrior, who is described and presented as kind of like a horrifying agglomeration of all of the parts of a knight plus a fishtail, where the armor has kind of grown into the body and the body has grown into the horse, and they're no longer separate beings anymore. And King Arthur's got to fight this. And this is happening right in front of him, and there's nothing he can do about it except consult his magic parrot. Like medieval people, man, medieval people. So it does seem like there is a specific thing about horse-legged merfolk with armor and weapons. There was another term that appeared to be the medieval word for maybe that creature, but it was really hard to research because soon after being that creature, it then became turtle, the armored tank of the sea. And so now this word is used for like turtle scientific names. I don't remember what the word is. It was like Zerteron, maybe. Yeah, turtles, armored horses, I guess. Anything else? If you think of questions, any of you, anyone watching this, you can find me on Facebook Messenger. Send me a message on Facebook Messenger. I don't really use Facebook that much. Or look up, I guess this is the part where I'm supposed to promote my stuff. Look up my blog. It's called Darth Kendra Research. You can leave comments there. There's, I think, contact information. And I will attempt to write this whole presentation up into a blog post that will probably turn out to be really long.
Well, I hope it's extra, extra long. So remember, that was Darth Kendra Research.
Yep, Darth Kendra Research, which is .wordpress.com.
Excellent. And, thank you to Swordsquatch. Thank you, Kendra. If you had fun today, think about donating to the Swordsquatch organization at paypal.com/paypalme/Swordsquatch. And thank you for spending your Saturday evening with Kendra and myself. And I hope you're all having the festive beverage of your choice, like my LaCroix Beach Plum flavor. All right, before we close out, are there any other questions? All right, if not, I think we will end. Thank you again, Kendra.
All right, thank you, Lisa.